Hi, this is Norbert with Game Quarry and GQ Audio. And as you can see, we're starting in a completely different place right now. A lot of these tutorials have focused primarily on FMOD and Unity integration. This last one in the series, at least for now, the last one in the series, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I made some of the sounds that are used for this last lesson. In the past, when I've done sounds for games, it's always been a matter of recording something from the real world, editing it, processing it, changing it, and then bringing it into a game. But that's not the only way to do it. Synthesizing your sounds is also a great way to go, and in some cases can make things a whole lot easier. A few years ago, I became aware of the book Designing Sound by Andy Farnell. It's a really, really good book about how to work with Pure Data, which is a free graphic programming language. It's what became of Max MSP when Cycling 74 bought Max. PD went its direction and Max went another one. And so it's very like Max in a lot of ways, but it's been developed by a different group of people and has a slightly different aesthetic. Well, PD is what Andy uses in this book, Designing Sound, and he had a section where he talked about how to make a rolling sound. It looks like this. Well, this isn't exactly what it looks like in the book. I made a few tweaks just to make it more appropriate for this game, but if I turn on the DSP, I can play the sound for you. Oops, I better take this out of edit mode first. Now I can play the sound for you. Maybe a little longer than it needs to go, but that's the right idea. Originally, this was supposed to be the sound of a rolling can over irregular ground. I removed that object here because I wanted it to roll over a smooth surface. And then to get this into the game, I added a couple other objects down here, and you can see in the comments if you want to use this, the file download is listed in the description of this video below. You click this to open a blank sound file, start the recording, play the sound, stop the recording. If you want to change the length of your sound, you can change the value right here. I set it up to be 30 seconds because I wanted to have plenty of material to work with. So after I recorded the sound, I brought it into an audio editing program and I grabbed a few different sections where I thought the intensity of the roll sound was different, or at least different enough that I could edit it as a single section, make a nice smooth loop out of that, and then bring those individual loops into FMOD, write a behavior, and then bring that into Unity. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on in this lesson. So I will leave PD behind for now. And let's take a look at how I set this up in FMOD. The event is right here. It's called rolling. You can see the timeline itself has nothing, but here's a parameter that I call roll vel, short for rolling velocity. If I play this back, you can hear that there's nothing at the beginning. That's because in the Unity game, the game starts and the ball isn't moving at all. And if I zoom in to the very beginning of this, you can see that for the first 0 to 0.1 or 5 or something, something really small, there's actually no sound listed there. So that means that when the ball is not moving or when it's just barely moving, there won't be any sound at all. And it actually doesn't kick in until you get right here to whatever this value is, 0.145, something like that. Related to that, if I open up volume, oh, did I put that over here? No. Master roll vel. Ah, there it is. Okay, I forgot. So many different places where I can put this automation. In the master, you can see that I have automation for volume. You do that by choosing right-clicking on the pot of the parameter you want to control. You can choose Add Automation, or in this case, Remove Automation if automation is already on there. There's a smooth curve going up until we get to a velocity value of 1.5. And so this is another parameter in FMOD that just enhances the smoothness of the transition from no movement to some slower movement. And if I scale out, you'll see that those volume levels here remain consistent at 0 dB throughout the rest, because these sounds were created in order to add the kind of intensity that I really wanted for this rolling. So the sounds themselves are right here, and I did number these sequentially, 0 through 5, so I've got 6 different sounds all together. And individually, well, we can just play through them here in the behavior. They sound like this. So here it's playing, but it's still really, really soft, so you can't hear it very well. If I increase the intensity, you can hear it a little bit. So this is a really slow roll. And this is rolling in the first level, second level, third, fourth, and then the fifth. And as I move that back and then up again, you can hear how FMOD does a really, really good job of smoothly transitioning these sounds across all the different velocities, which is really exactly what I wanted here. The process of making this is really simple. Import the sounds to your audio bin, drag them into this timeline that I created with the roll vel parameter. I overlap these, and FMOD automatically puts a crossfade in, so that helps ensure that these are going to be smooth. It's important to note that each one of these is a smooth looped file, and when you play it back, it loops perfectly on its own. So I could play this one back, just let it sit there, and the loop is nice and smooth. And I found for something like this, noisier sounds like this really, really work well. I tried doing this with pure sine waves initially, and I think the sine waves are almost too perfect. A sound like this that's a little noisier seems to work really, really well. But that's how this behavior is created. So you note that the name of the behavior or the event is rolling. It has a parameter called roll vel, or rolling velocity, and that's tied to the velocity value that we get from the ball in Unity. The values of this are 0 to 20, like I had for in the last tutorial example, because those are the numbers that, well, that's really the maximum and minimum velocity value that Unity seems to produce with the rollerball game. So those numbers work well here, and I can stretch out these behaviors accordingly. You know, and if I decided, oh, this one's a little short, maybe I want to give this one a little bit more length so we hear it more frequently, I can drag it over. I can shorten this one up so the crossfades are equal. I can do the same thing here if I want to give that one a little bit more prominence. If I want the crossfade to be a little bit more gradual or aggressive, I can certainly do that. And you've got tons and tons of flexibility here in order to change these things around. And it's not necessarily something you want to do at your whim. It's something that you do when you realize that the sound behavior doesn't quite match what you see in the game world. So all of these editing capabilities are there to make sure that what someone hears and what someone sees when they play the game really makes sense together. And that sense of immersion, or that suspension of disbelief, whatever you want to call it, is preserved and held intact, and that there's nothing happening with the soundtrack that's going to pull a player out of the game world. So this is finished. I'm going to save it, and as always, build our project, export the GUIDs since we made some changes here, and then I'm going to move back to Unity. In the FMOD menu, I will import banks, go to build. It can see that I'm modifying some assets. And speaking of assets, something I haven't mentioned in any of these tutorial series yet is that FMOD assets folder has all of the things that you create in FMOD. Rolling is what we've been working with, so I'll open that up. And over here in the inspector, Rolling has its own little playback widget. I can click on play. We don't hear anything again because the value of this slider sets it to 0. But I can move this back and forth. And we get exactly what we heard when we were tweaking that parameter pot back in FMOD. So if you want to verify that your events have translated from FMOD to Unity correctly, this is one way that you can test that. And also this lets you see the path, so you can tell that this is an event, :/rolling, and we'll use that syntax to refer to this event later on when we get to monodevelop and start to do some of the coding that we need. And in fact, we're actually ready to do that right now. We don't really have any work that we need to do here in Unity. Everything that we're going to do happens in code, so we'll jump over to monodevelop and get started with that. To begin, we need two variables. The first one we need is a variable that allows us to create a ball rolling event. So it's a private variable because we don't need access to it outside of the code here. And I'm calling it roll ball because it is a rolling event and a ball is what we're rolling. And then the other thing that we need is a variable that connects or will allow us to connect the event in the game with the event that we've authored in FMOD. So rollVel was the parameter name that I assigned in FMOD. We let monodevelop and Unity know that that's something that we're going to use here as well. With these two things in place, we're in good shape for getting both applications to talk to each other. But what we need to do next is come down to our fixed update function and add a line that allows us to retrieve the velocity value. pvel, and you can see the line above where I just pasted this new line of code, retrieves the velocity of the ball, and the line that I just pasted takes that value, pvel, and uses it to set a new or update the value for rollVel. So it's going to send that velocity value that's coming directly from Unity to FMOD and modulate along the timeline that we were just looking at and give us the right volume setting and the right sound file depending upon how fast the ball is rolling. And note that I put this in the fixed update function because that's where anything that's related to the physics of the game needs to go. Well, things are in good shape, but we haven't actually started anything. So none of this has been initiated. And that needs to happen right here in the start function. And we're going to grab a line of code, or I'm going to grab a line of code. You guys can type this out if you're following along, or you can copy it from the downloadable file. And if you haven't found that yet, it's in the description section of the video. This is a line that we've used in almost every one of these tutorials, where we refer to we start with the roll ball event. That's the event name that we've given this whole operation, and we tie it to the event that we created in FMOD, which is called rolling. And there's that syntax that we saw earlier. Event :/rolling. We saw in the inspector when we looked at the FMOD event. Rolling is the name that we gave it in FMOD. And I'm going over this because hopefully all of you who are following along will start to see how all these different things that you create in FMOD and Unity come together when you're doing this coding and mono development. Now, in order to get, well, it's really not to get this working. This next chunk of code that I'm going to paste is really just there as a precaution. It is a safety net. And what this line of code does is make sure that we're not going to send any null values from Unity to FMOD. Obviously, when the ball isn't moving, its velocity is 0, or if it's moving very slowly, we've got a tiny value. FMOD needs to get some sort of numeric value, and this is a safety net to make sure that that happens. And with that in place, we're actually ready to add the line of code that gets this whole thing up and running. So in the last line here at the bottom, I'm going to paste the start function. And this initiates the whole thing. So with all of that code in place, the roll ball event will start in the start function when everything else starts going, and that essentially loads all of these sounds and gets them ready for when the player hits the arrow keys and starts to move the ball around the game world. Well, I can save this code now because that's the last thing we needed to do, and then I'll jump back over to Unity. I can watch and see Unity churn through that script. No problems, no errors. Everything looks good. So let me test this. And I'll move kind of slowly. We can hear the ball roll, and I'm trying to avoid those pickups because I just want you to be able to hear the rolling sound. And I'm trying to do this at a variety of different speeds. Yeah, slow down. You can barely hear it. Yeah, it's really quiet when I'm going slowly. Let me try speeding up. I just let this one run out on its own. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. And for some reason now it's rolling on its own, but we just barely hear it because it's going so slow. Now to your ears, this may be okay, or you may think, I really want to be able to hear something at this point. And if that's the case, my guess is that it's probably something that we need to tweak with the volume automation that we put in the behavior. And wow, wouldn't it be nice to be able to tweak these things in real time? You know, throughout these lessons, we've been jumping back and forth, making an adjustment in FMOD, building, exporting GUIDs, re-importing in Unity, back and forth. It can get a little bit tedious. And I've been doing that mainly just because it's easier in the context of the lesson, but I'm happy to say that that's not the only way that this works. There is a really slick way to get FMOD and Unity to talk to each other in real time. So let me show you exactly how that works. And before I do, I should give thanks to Lily Chalupowski for this technique. She posted a video on YouTube a little while ago this summer, and she walks through all the details of this. I wouldn't have known how to do it if it weren't for her video. So Lily, thank you very much. I'm happy to share this with the group that I'm talking to here. So let's take a look at what I learned from Lily. Here in Unity, in the FMOD folder, there's two things we want to look at. Look at the FMOD listener and the FMOD studio system. I'm going to open both of those up here in mono develop. This first line of code here at the top, by default, this actually won't be in your file. I put it in there earlier so I could test these things in real time. But you are going to type hashtag define space and then in all caps FMOD_live update, just like you see here. And one thing that threw me when I first saw this code was the fact that this line does not end with a semicolon. So the lack of a semicolon in that first line is intentional here. That line you add on your own if you want to turn on live update. And then you can see here in the FMOD listener, the first 3 lines are already there. And that just checks to see that if there is such a thing called FMOD live update, which we did just define here in the FMOD Studio System file, if that exists, then we will define run in background, meaning we will turn run in background on, and we end that statement. So with these 4 lines of code, you are making you're making Unity ready to run in the background, which means that FMOD will be able to connect to it, and you'll be able to author sound effects and, well, just about any kind of behavior in FMOD in real time, and hear those changes in Unity as you're playing the game. So let's take a look at that. Back in Unity, run the game. So it's running in test mode right now. And then switch back to FMOD. And I'll go to File, Connect to Game. By default, it wants to connect to the local host, which is right because my Unity game is running here. If it was running on another computer, you can enter the IP address of that computer, but I'm running on the same machine, so I click OK. And this is something new in the most recent version of FMOD. When you're running live like this, this behavior is suddenly highlighted in red. And since I've got this rolling behavior open, let's go ahead and tweak this one. Earlier, I was kind of complaining about the fact that the sound just wasn't quite loud enough when the ball was rolling very, very slowly. So let me drop another point right here. And I'm going to tweak this. And let me go ahead and give it just a little bit of a kind of a smooth wave shape. And I'm eyeballing this right now. I felt that the timing of this whole thing was pretty good, but it just didn't make sense when I played it in the game. So I made those changes. I'm going to save FMOD and then come back to Unity, and I'm going to let it go really slowly. Yeah, it's moving slowly, and I can still hear it just a little bit. It hits the wall, and it's really loud, though. So while I'm happy with the fact that it's not making much sound when it's rolling, or at least when it's rolling slowly, yeah, that sounds really good. And the acceleration is fine. I'm happy with that. But listen to this. Bang! Smacks into the wall. That just doesn't make sense. It wasn't going that fast. I wouldn't expect the impact to be quite that loud. Granted, it's a different impact sound than what we had if it was moving quickly. It's just not, just doesn't make sense. It should be quieter. So let's switch over to the wall hit vel behavior that we authored earlier. And then I'm going to right click on the volume control for this track. I'm going to choose Add Automation, and here I get some volume automation. And just for starters, I'm going to add some volume automation and bring the volume down. This is what, minus 44 dB, and then it goes up to 0 dB as we go through higher and higher velocities. I think that should work well. It's a decent place to start, at least. So we'll save that, switch back to Unity. Now, to test this, we should hear a a much quieter impact sound when the ball is moving slowly. Well, I wish all of you were here. I could ask you what you think about this. My sense is that it's good for the slowest cases, but when we get into the medium speed impacts, it's just not quite enough. So let's create something kind of like what we did with the last one. Let me put in another one of these kind of sideways S-shaped curves. So that way the volume will kind of ramp up slowly, but then once we get above a certain velocity, it's going to come closer and closer to 0 dB. It's still not quite right. Yeah, I think this is just a little too sudden, so maybe this shape isn't quite right. Double click to get rid of that. Let's add another point. Let me do something that's more like this. Let's go ahead and let it just be linear. So I'm going to take those curves out. Is this a big change? I'm not sure. It's not that much different than what we had before. Yeah, and like I said, let's just let that be kind of close to linear. Save this. Yeah. Oh yeah, this is working well. Yeah, I'm happier with this. You know, with anything like this, you could tweak it forever and ever. You know, one of the things I notice right now is that now that these impact sounds are making more sense, the rolling sound is just a little bit too loud overall. One nice way that you could control this, I've already backed that rolling sound down to minus 19 dB. Let me bring it down to minus 26. And those two, the idea is to get these two components to match a little bit better. And well, it's not perfect. It certainly is better than it was. Like I said, I could tweak this sort of thing for days and days, which is not the most interesting thing for all of you to watch. But the important thing is that you can see how to do it. And just to reiterate as a final step, once you've tweaked things, while the two pieces of software are connected, and you feel that it's done and you're ready to call it finished, remember to save your project, build, export the GUIDs, and then in Unity, FMOD, refresh the event list. It gets all the new information that we just generated in FMOD, save our project in Unity, and that becomes a part of the game officially. So thanks everybody for watching this series. I hope it was helpful. I hope that this pulls back the curtain somewhat with how to get Unity and FMOD to work together. You know, as I mentioned in the first tutorial, documentation has been kind of inconsistent. There are some good resources out there. but I found that there were a lot of gaps or just a lot of basic things that weren't explained very well, and I hope that this series of lessons really help to fill in some of those gaps. At Indiana University, we are unofficially starting our game development program next week. And one of the classes that I'm teaching will be one of the first in the program where we will focus on all the things that I've talked about here. Game audio with Unity and FMOD integration. It's going to be a great experience for me and the students, I hope. And I imagine that it's going to give me all sorts of ideas for other kinds of lessons that I'll be able to do in the future. If there are any requests, feel free to send a comment. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to do everything that's requested, but it will certainly get my thought process started as to what are the things I could tackle in the future. And I do plan to do things in the future like this, just not quite sure which direction I want to go. But between comments I get from viewers and feedback I get from students in the classroom, I'm sure some sort of direction will be made clear. Thanks again.